kind of shocked the Bitcoin world. It's a huge event. And I've been in Bitcoin since 2011 when it was $1. And I've been following it and talking about it and promoting it this whole time. And this was such an exciting event that we decided with my wife, Stacy, that we wanted to be at the very forefront of this industry, at the forefront of Bitcoin movement. And so we'd have to move to El Salvador to see what it's like to live in a country where Bitcoin is legal tender. And that's what we did.
So you've moved lock, stock, and barrel down to El Salvador.
Yeah, it's easy for us to make a move. We're very agile and nimble. We're always traveling all the time anyway. We have a house in the United States, and we still have a house in the United States. But it's very easy to move there and get an apartment. It took just a few days, really.
We'll talk more about El Salvador in a moment. I remember we had our very first live event, much smaller than this one, January of 2014. Guy got up on stage. Almost no one had heard about Bitcoin, but he said, if you're a libertarian and you're not a millionaire through Bitcoin, you've done something wrong. That was 3 years after you were talking about it. What got you started way back then?
Right. Well, as I said, I heard about it in 2011 when it was $1. I had a guest on my show, the Keiser Report, who talked about it. For me, I was lucky in a way because I had already been involved in digital currencies and invented and patented a virtual currency. It has a U.S. patent. It's the only patented virtual currency, I believe. Patent number 5950176, I like to say. So I knew already a lot about the virtual currency market. And when I heard about Bitcoin in 2011, it immediately filled in a lot of blanks in terms of what we were trying to do back then and what Bitcoin can do that we were unable to do at that time. And so it just reignited this interest I had. And we immediately started to talk a lot about it on our show. The frustration that I had is in terms of convincing people to buy Bitcoin or
in terms of the world.
Well, I think you're alluding to the fact that our show, because it's distributed at that time on RT, Russia Today, a lot of people in the US and in the UK who had a bias against those countries were not listening to what we were saying. Whereas other countries around the world who don't have the same bias, they were listening to what we were saying. And as a result, a lot of people all over the world were buying Bitcoin at $1, $5, $10. They became millionaires in Bitcoin. And every day I get emails from people saying, I just wanted to say I bought a house, or I sent my kids to school, or, thanks to Bitcoin and the Keiser Report. But I don't get the same kind of reaction in the US. And the reason I think it's important is because censorship, any kind of censorship, it's really tricky. It's a double-edged sword. You think on one hand, you're protecting people from hearing certain things, but on the other hand, you're also preventing them from hearing things. And people are smart and they can figure things out from another country about the United States, that there's a bias from that reportage. But I also know that I'm able to strip away the bias and just hear some of the facts that are being reported, facts that I'm not hearing from the U.S. news outlets, because the U.S. news outlets like to report on other countries and would tend to ignore the U.S. and problems in the U.S. Because they have a bias in the U.S. All media has some bias. And that's why having global media, I think, is important for people to watch and to look at, to get a fuller picture of things. And we're lucky in that since Al Jazeera started this phenomenon of global 24-hour news in English back in the early 2000s with Al Jazeera English, they kicked off this global phenomenon where countries all over the world have an English bureau now. And so people are fortunate in that they can have access to these news outlets in English all over the world and have a fuller picture of what's going on. So as it pertains to Bitcoin, in this case, the censorship that was going on directly hurt a lot of people in the US who would have otherwise been early into Bitcoin. In South America, Latin America, Mexico was huge for our show. So big, in fact, that RT created RT Espanol, which became much bigger than the English-speaking channel for us. And videos would get 1 million, 2 million views. The Mexican market for Keiser Report is absolutely gigantic. We have reports, for example, in Cuba. It's just kind of an interesting story. In Cuba, one of the very few channels that they could get is from RT. And so Bitcoin was introduced to Cuba through the Keiser Report. And now there's a thriving Bitcoin community in Cuba. I'll tell you a funny story is that actually, we hear so many, when you do a lot of traveling, as I'm sure you are aware of, you see things that you wouldn't see if you were just home, in your house, walking your dog all day and not doing much. You see a lot of strange things. So a lawyer for the inmates on Guantanamo Bay in Cuba was in London talking to my wife, Stacy, and saying that the Keiser Report is very popular in Guantanamo Bay. And the story is that the TV that's allowed into Guantanamo Bay, they use the satellite really that faces away from the US, and they get RT on that satellite. And as a result, we have fans in Guantanamo Bay, and that the client of this lawyer who has somebody in Guantanamo Bay as a prisoner, freedom, and individual sovereignty would be into Bitcoin. And a fan is a fan. I've done TV for Iranian television for a number of years through Press TV. We have distributed through, as I said, through RT, done BBC. All of our TV projects that we do actually play on these foreign media outlets. We are produced essentially by the Associated Press. The Associated Press is our producer, and they sell the show or distribute the show to these other outlets, and then these other outlets they play the show. So we never talk to those outlets. Actually, we just talk to the Associated Press. They do the deal, and we have always 100% editorial freedom, except in one case, which would be the BBC. We did a show with the BBC, and they were actually very draconian in their censoring, which was, again, something I wouldn't have thought of. Special place in that it is a place where people need to be courageous and let journalists try to do their job, which is to go into places that people are unwilling to go and tell stories that people are unwilling to tell. And even if that means discovering and reporting on uncomfortable truths. And it leads to a lot of situations that are unpredictable and dangerous, to be quite frank. And so my feeling is that I have respect for the viewer to be able to discern for themselves if it is worthwhile news for them, or what the context of this news is, as long as I can say, and I can say that I'm not being managed editorially, that I have editorial freedom to do my job as a journalism. The distributor of that content, it doesn't make any difference to me. It's like YouTube, RT, France 24, or me shouting on the corner, as I've done many times. It's just, it doesn't matter what the distribution is. It doesn't matter what pipe you're getting the news from. As long as the journalist is doing their job properly, and that is to be completely unbiased to the best of their ability and to tell the story at the best that they can.